The moment my brother-in-law clinked his fork against his champagne flute, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the sound. It was the way my husband's sister smiled right before it happened. That tight, practiced smile she always wore when she was about to say something she'd been rehearsing for days. My brother-in-law stood up at the head of the table, and the whole backyard went quiet. 30 people. Paper lanterns strung above the picnic tables, my mother-in-law's famous potato salad sweating in the July heat. It was supposed to be a 4th of July cookout. It turned into the moment I learned exactly what my family thought of me. "Since we're all together," my brother-in-law said, raising his glass, "and since this is such a special occasion, we wanted to share some exciting news." He paused, smiled at my husband, then at me. "We found the house." Everyone cheered. I clapped because the people around me were clapping. 4 bedrooms, great school district close to mom. Another pause, longer this time, the kind that has weight behind it. The only thing standing between us and closing is the down payment gap. $22,000. He looked directly at me then, not my husband, me. And we were thinking, since Noelle's been doing so well at the firm, it would mean the world if she could cover it. As a gift, to keep the family together. The cheering didn't stop as fast as I expected. A few people were still nodding, still smiling, still raising their glasses. Like it was already settled, like I'd already said yes. "My name is Noelle Ashworth. I'm 32 years old. I'm a senior associate at a mid-sized corporate law firm in Charlotte, and for the 4 years I'd been married into this family, I had been treated like a financial solution dressed up as a daughter-in-law." I didn't say anything right then. I smiled, picked up my glass, took a sip of sparkling water, and let the moment pass. That was something I'd learned in law school. Not every statement requires an immediate response. Sometimes silence is its own kind of answer. But my mother-in-law leaned over from 2 seats down and patted my hand. "You're so good to this family," she said softly, squeezing my fingers. "We know you'll take care of them." And that was when the clarity hit. Not anger, not panic. Just a clean, cold understanding of exactly what was happening. I had been here before, not at this table, not with this particular ask. But I had been in this position before, more times than I could count without pulling up my bank statements, which, it turned out, I would be doing very soon. My husband, his name is Warren, came from a family that loved each other loudly and borrowed money quietly. His parents had built a life on generosity as a concept while practicing it exclusively in one direction. His sister, Deanna, was 3 years older than him, permanently between jobs, permanently in some kind of financial situation that required outside intervention. Her husband, Craig, was charming and vague, the kind of man who always had a plan and never had a follow-through. When Warren and I got married 4 years ago, I thought I understood the family dynamics. His mother was warm and overwhelming in equal measure. His father was quiet, let his wife speak for him most of the time, but occasionally surfaced to deliver a judgment that was supposed to sound wise and landed somewhere closer to controlling. Deanna and Craig had been married 6 years and had a daughter who I genuinely adored. My niece, Phoebe, who was 5 and obsessed with dinosaurs and called me Auntie No-No because she couldn't get the full name right when she was 2 and never course-corrected. I loved Phoebe. I loved Warren. I even loved parts of this family, the holidays and the chaos, and the way they all talked over each other during football games. What I had not signed up for was becoming their emergency fund. It started small, the way these things always do. $100 here, covering dinner there, slipping Deanna a Target gift card just to help with groceries after Craig's latest venture collapsed. Then it scaled. A year into our marriage, Warren's mother called in a family emergency. Deanna and Craig were about to be evicted. Could we help with 2 months of rent? Just temporarily, they'd pay it back. That was $4,000 I never saw again. 6 months later, Craig had a business opportunity. A buddy of his needed a small investment to get a food truck off the ground. Did we want in? Warren came to me with hopeful eyes, and I said yes, because I was still in the phase of marriage where I thought saying yes to his family was the same as saying yes to him. The food truck lasted some season, and then became a storage unit for Craig's camping equipment. Then there was the car. Deanna's transmission blew. They needed something reliable for Phoebe's school drop-offs. Could we co-sign on a loan? Just co-sign, they said. We're not asking for money, they said. My father-in-law made a point of telling me that co-signing wasn't the same as paying. I knew better. I was a lawyer. I literally worked with contracts every day, but I also knew what saying no would cost me in that family. And I was still running a calculation that included the cost of peace. I co-signed. Warren and I had an agreement that if they missed payments, we'd handle it and they'd pay us back. They missed 3 payments in the first year. We covered them. The paying us back part remained aspirational. By the summer of the 4th of July cookout, my quiet, uncounted contributions to the Ashworth family economy totaled. And I know this because I did eventually pull up the statements, just under $31,000 over 4 years. Loans, gifts, co-signed obligations, covered shortfalls. All of it given in the spirit of keeping the peace, keeping Warren happy, keeping my mother-in-law's face from doing that particular crumpling thing it did when she felt the family wasn't pulling together. And now they wanted $22,000 more. Announced in front of 30 people at a cookout. Not asked. Announced. That night driving home, Warren was quiet for most of the ride. I waited. I had learned to wait. It was a lot, he finally said, the way Craig said it. I get that. Do you? I kept my eyes on the road. I mean, they really do want that house. Phoebe would have a yard. I didn't respond to that, because Phoebe having a yard was not something I was opposed to. What I was opposed to was the assumption that I would fund it without being asked, without discussion, announced as a fait accompli over potato salad and sparklers. When we got home, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. I wasn't angry yet. I was something more useful than angry. I was methodical. I opened my spreadsheet, the one I'd started keeping after the second temporary loan, and I went through it line by line. Every transfer, every covered payment, every time I'd said yes when I'd wanted to say something else. When I reached the total, I sat with it for a minute. $31,420. Not counting the emotional math, which doesn't fit in a spreadsheet but accumulates just the same. Then I pulled up the cosign documentation from the car loan. I read every line this time, slowly. The liability was clear. I had known it when I signed, but I'd understood it the way you understand a risk, when you think the risk will never actually materialize. Now I looked at it differently. Now I looked at it like a problem that needed to be managed. Warren came and stood in the doorway. What are you doing? Reviewing some documents. He crossed his arms. You're not going to help them, are you? It wasn't really a question. The way he said it, there was already a posture in it, defensive, preemptive, like he was bracing for impact. I haven't decided anything yet, I said, which was mostly true. I hadn't decided how I was going to handle it. I had already decided what I was not going to do. He went to bed. I stayed up another 2 hours. When I finally closed the laptop, the house was dark and quiet, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years of marriage to this family. I felt clear. The call came the next morning before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. My mother-in-law's voice was already in its particular register, the one that wasn't quite asking and wasn't quite telling, the one that occupied some careful middle ground where she maintained the ability to later claim she'd never pressured anyone. I just wanted to touch base, she said. About last night, sure, I said. Craig and Deanna are so excited about the house. The school district, Noelle. Phoebe would thrive. A pause. We all just feel like this is the right moment for them, and you've always been so generous. There it was. The reframe. My previous compliance wasn't weakness or people-pleasing or the quiet desperation of someone trying to buy her place in a family that had never quite let her in. It was generosity. It was character. It was by implication something I should want to continue demonstrating. I appreciate you calling, I said. Warren and I are going to talk this week. Of course, of course. Another pause. I just want you to know how much it would mean, not just to them, to all of us. It's family, sweetheart. After I hung up, I sat for a long moment with the phone in my hand. It's family. That sentence had done a lot of work over the last 4 years. It had moved $31,000. It had gotten my signature on a document I shouldn't have signed. It had gotten me to smile and nod and write checks and absorb the quiet implication that my contribution to this family was primarily financial and that love was something I demonstrated with a wire transfer. I put the phone down and went to get ready for work. Warren and I had the talk on Tuesday evening. I had prepared for it the way I prepared for difficult depositions, calmly, thoroughly, with documentation. I walked him through the spreadsheet, not accusatorially, not emotionally, just factually. Every entry, every date, every amount. I watched his face as the numbers accumulated. I didn't realize it was that much, he said quietly. I know, you never said anything. I know that too. And that was true, and it was also something I had to own. I had let this happen by not stopping it. I had prioritized peace over honesty, and the bill for that decision had arrived in the form of a public announcement at a holiday cookout. So what are you saying? He looked at me carefully. You're done helping them. I'm saying I'm done being assumed available, I said. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. They need this, Noelle. Deanna's been trying to stabilize for years. She has been trying to stabilize for the entire time I've known her, I said carefully, gently, because this was his sister and I understood that. At what point does the stabilizing happen? And whose money does it take? He didn't have an answer for that. I hadn't expected one. What I hadn't expected was what he said next. My mom said you were being cold about it. That you've seemed different lately. I looked at him. Different how? Like you're pulling back. From the family. Something moved through me then. Not quite anger, not quite hurt, something older and more tired than either of those. I had spent 4 years trying to be the right kind of daughter-in-law. Showing up. Writing checks. Biting my tongue. And the story being told about me was that I was cold. That I was pulling back. Warren, I said quietly, I need you to hear what I'm saying, not what your mother is saying about what I'm saying, what I am actually saying to you right now. He looked at me. And for a moment I saw him, not his family's version of the situation, just him, the man I married. Tired, caught, wanting everyone to be okay. I hear you, he said. But later that night he called his mother. I heard him in the other room, voice low, and I didn't listen to the words, but I understood the shape of the conversation. He was managing it. He was always managing it, that space between me and his family, trying to smooth the surface so nobody had to feel the friction. The friction was still there. He was just the only one pretending otherwise. 3 days after the cookout, Deanna texted me directly. No preamble, no small talk. I thought you were different. I guess family doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down on my desk and went back to the contract I'd been reviewing. At lunch, Craig called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 3 minutes long and involved the phrases, just trying to understand where this is coming from. We've always considered you one of us. And Phoebe asks about you, you know. The last one was the sharpest because it was the most deliberately placed. He knew I loved Phoebe. Everyone knew I loved Phoebe. And so Phoebe had been deployed as an emotional argument. I saved the voicemail. Not for any particular reason yet, just because I had learned, over 4 years of this family and a decade of legal work, that documentation is never a mistake. That evening, Warren's father called. This was unusual. My father-in-law communicated primarily through nods and the occasional firm handshake. His calling me directly meant the situation had escalated to a level that required his particular brand of gravitas. Noelle, he said, in his measured, deliberate way. I want you to know that what Craig said at the party, that was poor form. I told him so. I was surprised enough that I didn't say anything. However, he continued, and there was the word I'd been waiting for, Deanna and Craig are struggling, real struggling. And this family takes care of its own. I understand that, I said. You're a lawyer, you understand money. You know that $22,000 is a different thing to you than it is to them. That's true, I said. And the $31,000 I've already contributed over the last 4 years was also a different thing to me than it was to them. I didn't bring that up because I didn't think it was necessary. I'm bringing it up now. There was a pause. That's a real number? He asked. I can send you the documentation if you'd like. Another pause. Longer this time. No, he said finally. I believe you. He didn't apologize, he didn't say anything else particularly useful, but something in his voice had shifted, some assumption he'd been carrying that had quietly been set down. He said goodnight and hung up, and I stood in my kitchen and breathed for a moment, because that conversation had cost me something. Not money, but the careful, exhausting neutrality I'd been maintaining, and I needed a second before I could put it back on. The Sunday after the cookout, my mother-in-law organized what she called a family lunch. She did not call it an intervention. She called it a chance to reconnect, to clear the air, to come back together as a family over a meal. I had a very strong feeling about what it actually was. Warren asked me if I was going. I said yes. He looked relieved in a way that told me he'd been uncertain, and the uncertainty worried him, and the worry had probably driven another quiet phone call I didn't listen to. I dressed carefully that Sunday, not to impress. Just because I have found, professionally and personally, that the way you present yourself when you know something difficult is coming matters for your own internal state as much as anything else. We arrived to find 8 people already there. His parents, Deanna and Craig, an aunt and uncle I saw maybe twice a year, and 2 cousins who I'd always liked but who had clearly been gathered for the specific purpose of outnumbering me. The lunch itself was fine. His mother made brisket. The cousins asked about work. Phoebe climbed into my lap 20 minutes in and demanded I admire a drawing she'd made of a stegosaurus. And I admired it genuinely because it was actually a pretty good stegosaurus for a 5-year-old. Then the dishes were cleared, and his mother set down her coffee cup, and the air changed. We wanted to talk about the situation, she said, not to me specifically, to the table. But everyone at that table already knew who the situation was. Craig and Deanna came to us with a real opportunity, my father-in-law added. A home, for their daughter, for our granddaughter. He looked at me then. We were hoping, as a family, we could figure out a path forward. The aunt, Warren's mother's sister, a woman named Gerta, who I had never had a cross word with, said gently, "It's hard to watch families struggle when the means are there to help." And that was it. That was the shape of it. Not a conversation, a presentation. The family had been arranged around a table to look at me and say, collectively, "The means are there, you are the means. Deploy yourself accordingly." I looked around the table. Phoebe had been moved to the kids' card table in the corner, cheerfully eating a second piece of brisket and narrating something to herself about prehistoric creatures. Warren sat beside me, hands folded, looking at the tablecloth. "I appreciate everyone being here," I said, because I had spent 10 years as an attorney learning how to begin difficult things calmly. "I want to be honest with all of you, because I think honesty is what this family actually needs right now, even if it's uncomfortable." My mother-in-law's expression shifted, not to anger, to something more careful. "Over the last 4 years," I continued, "I have contributed $31,000 to this family. Loans, gifts, covered obligations. I want to be clear that I gave all of it freely, because I love my husband and I wanted to support his family. But I also want to be clear that none of it was ever acknowledged as a real number. No one has ever sat at a table and said that amount out loud." The aunt blinked. One of the cousins looked at her plate. $22,000 more is not something I'm in a position to give right now, I said. Not because I can't, but because I have reached a point where I have to decide that my financial future matters too. Warren's and mine. Together, Deanna's jaw tightened. "So you're saying no?" "I'm saying I can't keep doing this." "We're not asking you to keep doing anything," Craig said. And his voice had gone tight and smooth the way voices do when someone is trying to sound reasonable and isn't quite pulling it off. "We're asking for one thing. One time." "This isn't one time," I said quietly. "That's what I'm trying to explain." My mother-in-law set her hands flat on the table. "Noelle." Her voice was careful, controlled. "We have always welcomed you into this family. We have always treated you like a daughter." And then it came. The sentence I hadn't been expecting. The one that landed differently than anything else that afternoon. "But daughters," she said, "contribute to their families." The table went very quiet. I don't know what my face did in that moment. I hope it was neutral. I felt Warren go still beside me. Daughters contribute. Not daughters are loved. Not daughters are supported. Daughters contribute. As in, your place here has conditions. As in, we have been keeping a ledger too, and the currency is different from mine but the structure is the same. "I understand," I said finally, and I meant it. I understood completely and permanently, in a way I had been not quite letting myself understand for 4 years. I reached for my coffee. I took a sip. I set the cup down. "Thank you all for lunch," I said. "The brisket was wonderful." I didn't say another word on the topic for the rest of the afternoon. I started making calls the following Monday. First, I called the lender on the car loan. Not to threaten, not to cause a problem. Just to understand clearly and precisely what my current exposure was and what my options were. I had an attorney walk me through the cosign documentation again, not the general understanding I'd had when I signed, but every specific clause, every scenario. I needed to know exactly where I stood. The answer was not great. The answer was that my name was attached to that obligation in a way that had real consequences if Craig and Deanna stopped making payments. Which, given recent history, was not an abstract possibility. I took a day to think. Then I called my own attorney, a woman I trusted completely, who specialized in exactly this kind of thing, and I asked her what my options were. She walked me through them. Not all of them were available, but some of them were. And the ones that were available required that I act while I still had the leverage of being current on the obligation. I want to be clear about what I did and didn't do. I did not try to hurt anyone. I did not blow anything up. I made careful, legal, documented decisions to protect myself from obligations I had taken on under pressure and goodwill that had since revealed itself to be conditional. I also sent Warren a detailed email, which is not how I would have chosen to communicate in an ideal world, but which I sent because I needed him to have the information in writing, in the same way I had learned to document everything over 4 years of watching money leave my account and promises float away. I told him what I was doing and why. I told him the exact amounts again. I told him I loved him and I was not leaving, but I was done being the family's financial safety net without acknowledgement, without partnership, without being treated like a person rather than a resource. He called me from the office. His voice was strained. "They're going to be upset, I know. The loan thing, they're going to say you blindsided them." I gave them every opportunity to have a real conversation, I said. The cookout wasn't a real conversation. The family lunch wasn't a real conversation. Those were audiences, not conversations. A long pause. "I don't know how to fix this." "I'm not asking you to fix it," I said. "I'm asking you to stand next to me while it's unfixed for a while." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Okay." That one word did more for my marriage than anything that happened in the weeks that followed. The fallout was swift and unambiguous. My mother-in-law stopped calling me and started calling Warren twice a day. My father-in-law, who had previously expressed some private understanding, went silent, which I had come to understand was his version of taking a side. Deanna sent a series of texts that I read once and did not respond to. Craig left 2 more voicemails. In the second one, his voice cracked slightly, and he mentioned Phoebe again, and I will be honest with you. That one was harder. But I also knew that Phoebe was fine. Phoebe had 2 parents. Phoebe had grandparents who adored her. Phoebe's stability was not actually dependent on $22,000 from me. It was dependent on the adults in her life making sustainable decisions, which was a thing no amount of my money would ever force them to do. 3 weeks after the cookout, the house fell through. I learned this from Warren, who had heard it from his mother. The sellers had accepted another offer. Craig and Deanna were devastated. The family collectively understood this as a tragedy caused by my failure to act in time. I understood it as an outcome that had nothing to do with me. Warren and I had dinner that night, just the 2 of us. It was a quiet dinner. He told me about the house. I said I was sorry they were disappointed, because I was not sorry for my decision, but sorry that Phoebe wasn't going to have that yard, at least not right now. He nodded. We talked about other things. After dinner, he came and stood beside me at the kitchen sink while I rinsed the dishes, and he said, I looked at the spreadsheet again. I handed him a glass to dry. And $31,000, he said. I keep thinking about what that number felt like to me. And then I think about what it must have felt like to you. I didn't say anything. I let the water run. I should have paid attention, he said. I let you carry that. That sentence wasn't a solution to anything. It didn't fix the family situation or resolve what his sister and Craig were going to do next, or make his mother call me again in a warm voice. But it was true, and he had said it, and I had needed to hear it for a long time. Thank you, I said. I'm sorry it took this long. I handed him another glass. Me too. 2 months later, the family dynamics had settled into something new and not entirely comfortable. My mother-in-law was civil but different, more careful, like someone who has recalibrated their assumptions about what they can say. Deanna and I had not spoken directly. Warren served as a quiet intermediary, passing along information in both directions without asking me to perform a reconciliation I wasn't ready for. My father-in-law had said, on one occasion when we were briefly alone at a family dinner, "You were right to draw a line." He hadn't elaborated. I hadn't asked him to. Craig and Deanna were renting. They had found a place, smaller than the house they'd wanted, in a decent enough area. Phoebe's school was fine. She still called me Auntie No-No, and I still showed up to her birthday parties, because she was 5 and completely innocent in all of this, and I had never once confused being done with the financial arrangement with being done with her. Warren and I kept talking. Not always easily, not always without friction, but honestly, in a way that our marriage had needed for longer than I wanted to admit. We started working with a financial planner. together for the first time, our money as a shared thing with shared goals and shared decisions. It felt strange and overdue and right. One evening in September, sitting on our back porch in the cooling air, Warren handed me a glass of wine and said, "Are you okay?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "I think I'm better than okay," I said. "I think I'm learning what okay actually feels like." He sat down beside me. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere down the street, someone's kids were playing in a yard, shouting about something. That particular pitch of outdoor childhood joy that carries for half a block on a September evening. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what my mom said at the lunch. That daughters contribute, I remember. That was wrong," he said simply. "That's not what family is." I looked at him. "No," I said, "it's not." I hadn't gone looking for this moment, the full reckoning, the family that finally saw me clearly, the husband who chose me unambiguously. Life isn't actually structured that way, and I had long since stopped waiting for a version of events where everyone understood everything and apologized correctly and the resolution was clean. What I had instead was this: a marriage that was more honest than it had ever been, a clear understanding of what I owed and didn't owe, and a porch on a September evening where I could sit with a glass of wine and feel, for the first time in 4 years, like I was inside my own life rather than funding someone else's. I raised my glass. Not in triumph, not in anger, just in quiet acknowledgement of the version of myself who had finally stopped shrinking. The summer had started with someone else making an announcement about my money. This fall, for the first time, the only one deciding what happened with my life was me.